Da, da,
If we have
da,
if we have to go to the backup broadcast, your excitement for the backup broadcast will not be in it.
da. Bracket. Are we good?
Yes.
Okay. We can't wait. We have to. It's called the Magician's Edition, not the Fillory Edition.
Not the filler edition?
Well, but then I can't say your dose of Deep from the Heart of Fillory.
The other one was the Westeros edition. It wasn't the Game of Thrones edition.
I guess that's true. And then I just did a different one each time.
Yeah, you
so
did
that's
different
fine.
location. You can
What
do
is
it
it?
from like,
What was that called? What was that? The Rainbow Bridge?
Yeah, the Rainbow Bridge.
Okay. The absurdly, ridiculously pretty Rainbow Bridge that
Yes.
I'm just like, why the fuck is this here? And then I'm like, which actually fits though, because it's just Fillory. But
Yeah.
Okay. Hello and welcome to the Life in the Kraken podcast. Do I do podcast Westeros Edition? Is that how we did it?
I don't know.
Podcast again?
Let me go. I'll go find.
Yeah,
one
I
of those
did.
to do it.
No, I had to. That's what it said.
You sure?
Because it wouldn't make it.
You-
Well, it wouldn't
you're-
make sense. Well,
Why don't I check? Give me 30 seconds. I have them
Whatever.
right here. I can go listen to them. Yes, you said podcast Westeros edition.
okay. Sure.
Your dose of whatever from deep within them, whatever.
Okay. Hello and welcome to the Life in the Kraken podcast, Fillory Edition. Your dose of wait, did I
What?
say pop culture?
Your dose of you said your dose of Game of Thrones. This is your dose of the Magicians.
Okay, that's fine. Need to know.
Yeah.
These are important things, damn it.
No, it's fine. It's good to check these things.
All my rhythm is gone. I've been doing really well. Have been messing up most of these.
Uh-huh.
I have been messing up most of these. That is an empirical fact.
I just didn't hear the 19 times you messed up in the video game one because you didn't send that part.
I did actually mess up, or no, did I mess up once? I think they fucked with me on the video game. No, I think I nailed it. I can't remember. There was a very specific reason I thought something happened in the video game one. I can't remember. Yes, I wasted time redoing it because that made sense because I care so much about the mess ups. Hello and welcome to the Life in the Kraken podcast, Fillory Edition, your dose of the Magicians, deep from within. Damn it, did that wrong. Because there's no within the bridge. It's on the bridge. There's no deep. I mean, deep on the bridge?
Should we not pick the bridge? What's
No.
the name? What's the name of the?
Yeah, the castle's going to be around. We're picking the bridge.
Okay.
On the bridge? From the bridge. From the Rainbow Bridge. We just have to change it.
Direct from the Rainbow Bridge.
Direct from the Rainbow Bridge.
Yeah.
That works. Hello and welcome to the Life in the and it's all gone to hell now. Done. It's all done. All my professionalism is gone. I had earned it. It took so long to earn it. It's all gone.
Your dose of Harry Potter, deep from within that.
Damn it! It's all gone. Okay. Hello and welcome to the Life in the Kraken podcast, Fillory Edition. Your dose of the Magicians directly from the Rainbow Bridge. I'm your host, David Robertson, editor-in-chief of We've Always Lived in the Kraken blog. And joining me from our Austin branch, managing editor of the same blog, Josh Kayusewicz.
You guys are lucky because thanks to Trump, I have no outrage left for the show.
As we've mentioned, we are now going to once again embark upon doing more or less week-to-week coverage of a television show, much like we do in our Life in the Kraken Westeros edition. As you would expect, we picked a show that is obviously just as great and beloved as Game of Thrones, and that's absolutely not true. Instead, we picked The Magicians, which is a show based on a book series that is as beloved for Josh and I as anything else. But the show has had some problems.
It's clear, at least, that we only care enough about fantasy shows to do these series.
That's possibly true as well, but you're not supposed to tell them that. They don't need to know that this is just because this is a fantasy series and we're too lazy to do the rest of them.
Hey, I'm still holding out for our series on The Prisoner. That's gonna be great.
Oh, that's gonna be painful. But we have talked about the Magicians before in a past edition of this vein of podcast.
Yeah, if you go back to Life in the Kraken podcast episode 7, the denotification of magic, we talked about the whole first trilogy as well as the books by Lev Grossman on which the show is based. Poorly based.
There was some angst and rage. I'll say that now. But we're back to discuss the second season because we both decided that after having hour-long conversations about the show each week, we might as well make you all listen to them. So
yeah,
this might work a little differently than even the Game of Thrones one does because, well, more than likely it'll just be Josh and I. There won't be others joining us. And I would like to pretend there won't be a lot of outrage, but that's probably a lie, especially on Josh's side. But it should be fun, and we'll see kind of what happens as we explore this endeavor. Hold on one second.
Okay.
I need to look. Turns out like velvet pants are going to make way too much noise. Okay. Now that I will not be making hilarious screeching sounds every 5 seconds from breathing.
I dub you podcast host of Awkward Audio.
Yeah, well, I'm fine with this. It's fine. If we're ever famous, people can hear this stuff. Otherwise, you'll just save it to ruin me with. Josh, what was the name of this episode?
Knight of Crowns.
Cool. All right. With that, we will get started. And we're going to talk about, as I said, the season premiere of season 2 of Magicians, Knight of Crowns. So I guess the first question is, did this episode do anything for you, Josh, to make your rage less at the show?
This episode marked the transition that I think is going to happen for me of like last season was a lot of rage at how they failed to adapt one of my favorite novels ever. This season is really just like seems like a continuation of the story that they created and not really the second book, at least so far. So there's less rage because I don't have anything to compare this to, and more just like sadness at the fact that they've sort of wandered so far away from excellent source material. So I'm still trying to struggle to like evaluate how much I like the show on its own.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like so far the show is doing exactly what I implored it and hoped it would do at the end of the first season, which is just accept that you're not the books and figure out what you are. And the main reason I think I had somewhat more hope for the show than you did is I was already past the point of accepting it wasn't the books, and it kind of like just accepted that it was never going to be. And now just desperately needed them to figure out what their own show was and go off from that.
I mean, that's definitely their best chance because I am positive they were never going to fix their actual like adaptation.
Well, plus all the best episodes last season were the ones in which they more or less either embraced their own stuff or properly combined their own stuff with things that from the book. So it seems like now they've course corrected to where they know there's certain very specific important events from the books, and they're going to pick different ways to get to them. And, you know, sometimes that could work, sometimes it can't. But I mean, it does seem to create a different show it's a different show, obviously, than the books are going to be. But I think I could enjoy this show. And it's kind of what I was hoping, that like this could become this interesting, like fantasy, like somewhat funny, but like adventure show. It doesn't have it doesn't have any of the depth Magicians has, but could still be a really fun show. And that's kind of what that's what like the peaks of last season were. And it looks like, at least so far, I'll say that I was at least like if I had just watched this show without it being based on the Magician's like source material and it was based off the characters doing stuff like this, I would have like had absolutely no real problem with it. The issues now are, yes, I mean, even though I agree, there is the nagging feeling of kind of lamenting that this could, have gone a really different way. It doesn't actually go like television shows do, but I'm cautiously optimistic for what we may have.
I mean, I think the jury's still out on how well they're going to tell their own story this time. There were some things in this episode that concerned me, some things that I'm worried that they're not going to follow through on properly. But I will actually give them a couple more episodes to see if there are any signs of them either falling through or not falling through on these things.
There's definitely there's definitely concerning potential stuff, but I'm choosing not to penalize the show for things they haven't done yet. And I guess also they're also benefiting from the fact that without question, the worst parts of last season were the first episode, like the first 3 episodes, and like the last 5 minutes of the last episode. But like the first 3 episodes were just so rushed. They were like the worst of every world. It was like they were desperately trying to be in the books, but at the same time they were like trying to do their own thing, and they were rushing through, and they rushed through like half of the first book in 3 episodes and didn't explain anything, and then they finally slowed down. So like this one seems like the pacing of this episode was actually pretty good, other than like they had to obviously deal with the ramifications of all the crazy shit they did at the end of last season. But in general, at least thought they have a better understanding of it to makes me think that they could go forward. And I like the character direction people are going with and kind of where they set those up. Now they've shown many times that they can go off like they can screw this up pretty easily. But like, I find myself cautiously optimistic for this show, especially as I just continue to pretend it's not based on one of my favorite book series of all time.
Well, one of the things in those terms that worries me is that they are still tied to the books, and the books are very carefully constructed to achieve the effects that Grossman wanted to achieve. And when you start aiming for different things and start changing things, but maybe not changing things that are going to hold you back, that can lead to problems. Like one thing that I'm definitely concerned about is, one of the last scenes in this episode is where Quentin talks to Elliot about the fact that the gang is going back to Breakbills to try and follow their new, quest line of anti-beast murder. And they point out that just like in the books, time runs differently between, the real world and or Earth, I guess, and Fillory. And that seems to me to be something that could, that like if you were constructing the show from scratch, you probably would not include, because the show is more fun if characters can freely jump between worlds without like every time they come back to Fillory, Elliot is like 20 years older, and that's super sad,
Yeah, though I kind of argue that even the Magicians as a book kind of like eventually were like, because like, Quentin disappeared, they went into Fillory and they didn't really have like they did that, but they never really enforced it that much. Like they kind of did travel. Quentin wasn't really gone that long after he left. When the events happened that caused him to future events happen that cause him to go away for a while, it doesn't seem to affect anything. So I don't know.
Case, like why point it out in this episode? Like nobody would have noticed had they just quietly dropped that idea.
My assumption is, and I can only base this off of previews, is that they may use this as a way to skip the like period in which Elliot has to figure out how to be a leader. And they may have
mean a really cool and interesting period where his character would get tons of development and there'd be lots of great world building, and why would you skip that?
Well, yeah, but but it's not fun to do that. So
now, please let's jump ahead to the part where we can fight monsters, because that's what the show is really about, right? Fighting monsters.
I mean, it wouldn't shock me if, for example, they skip ahead like a year or something.
Yeah.
And the point of that year was to like allow Elliot to get a little bit of a course correction of character and fix things because of like how shaky the show is time. I agree. I don't know if this is a good idea, but that seems to be a bigger deal because obviously they're not going to just be like, they leave and they come back and it's played by now like an old man.
I mean, on a macro level, this is kind of, and obviously they haven't done it yet, so we're just speculating. But this is kind of one of my macro level problems with the show, which is that like part of what makes the book so great is not necessarily the story they're telling, but that Grossman slows the story way down so you can feel the emotions of every particular moment, including all the moments when you're sitting around bored waiting for the story to start. And I think that the show, like on an episode level, on a season level, especially last season, was just like going too fast, sticking to the plan too much, and not really giving us those moments to breathe and experience the interestingness of these lives.
Yeah. I mean, that's true. I mean, you're correct in saying that. I will kind of, I guess, loosely connect it since you brought up the whale weakness of the show is when they try to copy the books but don't understand the stuff behind it.
Yeah.
And it feels like they're forced to tack things on. I don't quite feel as strongly as this as, let's say, I felt about the ridiculousness of how Quentin and Alice broke up in the show, simply because they broke up in the books and there was actual reasoning behind it. And instead they just took the event and then replicated it, but without any of the character build or the explanations of what it could do.
And I love that because they don't seem to have like now that they're on the other side of that breakup, they don't feel like they had the breakup because everybody's still like, but I still love you. And that's because it didn't make sense that they broke up in the first place.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. I mean, the only thing I can possibly say to somewhat justify the ridiculousness of that how they did the breakup was, I'm always hesitant of how much we should talk about other book. I mean, on this specifically, how much we should talk about other book stuff. We're going to probably try to err on not spoiling everything in the books.
I think it's okay to talk about at least the first book at this point.
Some of it. I'll just say there was an event in the first book that doesn't happen in the show that we've been told is going to happen in the show. And it involves,
I don't even know what you're talking about. Can you give me a hint?
Well, yeah, it involves what happens to Alice
in
the first book.
Gotcha.
And so one thing we've talked about, one thing that the book does kind of interesting is there's a part of how they do that breakup in the book is also set aside with effectively there's almost a ticking clock element, sort of, that kind of like shortens the time period in which people have to react to each other. That's kind of been removed in the show. So I actually probably would be really annoyed if I had to watch like 6 episodes of Alice hating Quentin.
Well, it's weird because like despite their attempts, like there's no urgency in this episode. Like all like the main Quentin group are all like, oh god, the beast could come back at any moment and devour us. But after a while, it becomes clear that that's not really going to happen. Like this is more become a long-term problem, and we as the audience know that the beast is hanging out with Julia, and so they don't even need to be worried. So there's this weird like de-escalation of stakes, which you're right is very different from the book, where like at the end of that book they are tossed into a war zone. And they are just like trying to survive through the end of that story, and so this feels very different from that.
Yeah, and so they kind of have to do things a little differently, and so I will say this: the resolution to the ultimately what happens between Quentin and Alice doesn't truly come until book 3 in the books of events that happen in book 1. So I could see why they would be hesitant to do that in TV time.
Here's my let me talk about this, because here's one of my main concerns with this episode in terms of things that I'm worried about going forward for their story, not necessarily the books. Although this will begin with comparison to books because that's what this entire series is going to be about. In the books, that ending is like a cataclysmic event that not only climaxes that book, but sort of reverberates throughout the series going forward. It's a very important moment. In the show, that moment still happens, or most of it still happens in the encounter with the beast. And then that last 2 minutes happens where the storyline doesn't conclude. And now we go into this first episode of the new season, and virtually everything that happened in that scene is reversed immediately. There's shots of all the people who like were tossed aside by the beast, who we thought were like hurt or dead, and they just get up, and they're just like, fuck it, fuck consequences for that. So it seemed kind of even hypocritical for the one character of this episode to be like, actions have consequences, even stray words. And I'm like, no, they don't. You just deleted all your narrative consequences. And so I'm concerned that this resetting is something that they're not going to be able to resist later on.
Yeah, I will say this. I read, let me think here. I'm trying to think. I'm going to be honest, I can't remember who said this, but I actually think, at first I also was kind of like, where are the consequences? I actually kind of respected, though, as someone brought up, what the scene actually represented was a perfect representation of Quentin and Alice, which is Quentin runs away thinking he needs to save everything and makes a questionable decision in order to do so. And then he shows up and Alice has just fixed everything because she's competent and gets things done. And
sure, and that was that. I'm not disputing that was a good character moment that matched their characters, but I think in terms of the wider narrative, it's troubling.
Well, right, but I could live with it because I thought that character was so strong. I felt it was like, okay.
But this comes in a way. This comes back to my problems with the lack of urgency in this episode, which is like, the beast is really scary because we've seen him murder a bunch of people, and then he seemed to like murder or seriously hurt the entire main cast, who then just got up because nothing really happened and Alice has got this. So like, why is he scary anymore? What is different between what just happened and what's going to happen in the future if he comes back?
Well, two things. Well, three things, since I'll also then eventually to the point I was going to make before you kept insisting upon arguing a point I was in the middle of replying to.
Okay.
I will say that one, hold on. I'm clipping a lot, so I'm going to lower my gain.
Okay.
And my volume. Still sound good on your end?
Yeah, you're a little quieter.
Okay. So one, you have to, there's the fact that Alice is only going to have these powers for a certain amount of time. So they at least established that, like, we don't know how long this is going to last. And so, like, even if, Alice can fix things, theoretically, she can't do it yet. But two, the bigger narrative point is they made a really big deal bringing up that the reason this all happened, the reason what happened end of last season happened is that Alice froze. Like, she wasn't ready. Well, okay, it was a two-pronged thing. One, she froze, and two, she didn't have the goddamn dagger. So,
yeah.
Which I feel like they forgot to mention. But she did. But it is true that she went for the dagger, and then as soon as she didn't have it, she just like panicked.
Yeah.
And clearly, if she hadn't, she could have actually helped. Like, it's clear that she could have held her own. And to me, knowing what direction they should be leading Alex to, this sets a really good narrative of building up her confidence, of her becoming really strong, and either they have a confrontation with the beast in which she has the powers, they run out, but she still has to fight on her own, or like however they want to do it. I think it sets things up really well for the story they're trying to do, since they kind of change things. The second, and so like together, those two things I think kind of like made me more okay than I expected, because obviously I too was like, well, someone's got to die. I mean, I appreciated the hilarity that they're all like, everyone's fine, and Penny's just holding a box with his hands. And he's like, I don't have any hands.
See, that was funny, but then they got rid of that too, which is I'm just like, I'm not necessarily saying that I need them to do the story in the book where like Penny learns how to do magic without any hands and becomes a badass. But you at least got to replace that with like something.
Well, but they did though. They replaced it with Penny no longer has control of his hands.
Yeah, but that's Ron Weasley's broken wand all over again. That's not great.
Maybe. I mean, I'm willing to let them see what they do with that before I'm saying that's useless. Like, it could.
Like I said, I'm issuing concerns here. I'm just in the Fox News style. I'm just asking questions here.
Anyhow, I would say that as your greater thing of like the beast urgency, I like approached it from the perspective of, I thought they at least did a good enough job of having them try to be like quick about things, but then continuously being slowed down by just like the bullshit of Fillory.
Mm-hmm.
So, Quentin's like, we have to go to the armory. And then they're immediately like, let's go to the armory. And then Penny's like, well, I need to fix my hands first. And then he goes off and Margot goes with him. And that I actually enjoy that they gave some Margot and Penny like screen time, because I don't think I'm trying to think of the amount of time both of them spent talking to each other in the first season. It's very little.
I thought that was a basically new character pairing for them. No, I like pretty much everything the show is doing with regards to Fillory. I like how Fillory is kind of filled with like silly, petty, like grubbing people. I think that's very entertaining and very unique for a fantasy world. I love one of the reasons that I'm going to be sad if we really skip Elliot like taking power is I loved how awkward it was when he showed up and the regions were like, hey, we've been running this for like 400 years, but now you're here. Isn't that great? Like, so I think that's all good. As much as I joke about like, you know, they all have new quest lines now, I actually did like the way the episode was structured around like, you know, we have to get this. Well, and in order to do that, we have to do this first. Well, in order to do that, we have to do this first. And then like the end of that chain was Elliot being sad, which is always like a great foundation for anything.
Yeah, and I think that was a good way though. That was an example of them at least understanding how, if they're going to like de-emphasize the urgency, how they can do it in a way that doesn't seem weird. Because like they at least kept moving forward. It was just they got delayed, and then the end is like, well, we have to go talk to the dean now because we have to find this. We're having to find this out to stop the beast. So they're all like, you know, focused around the beast, and I think that to me showed a level of like detail that they didn't have in the first season.
No, I agree, and I think that like that is a really good solution to their basic dilemma of like, how do we tell a story about not getting anywhere without making that you know, boring by the standards of, you know, popular fiction television. And I think the idea they have here of like, we're always, you know, we always have the illusion of progress, but the treadmill is like spinning us backwards as we go, is a really interesting way to solve that.
Yeah, and I think it's also a good way because it will let Fogg have like more of a role in the show because he was a really interesting character, and especially now that he's out of his time loop, I'm interested to see what happens with him. Yeah. I think it will allow for some different character interactions. There's a lot of stuff just to enjoy in terms of how they kind of gave a different quest line to set things up. I mean, I'm interested to see what they're going to do with Penny because a lot of his stuff happened off book, like his real journey. Like Penny's always been an interesting character in the show because so much of what happens with Penny in the books is like outside of a couple places kind of doesn't happen.
Well, he's one of the main instances in the book of a person that we don't see grow because Quentin doesn't understand him. And the show really is not done that. Partly because they can't, because, you know, if you're going to make Penny a character who's on screen, we have to understand him. But it is, you're right, it is something that's very different here.
Which, I mean, I like it for the purpose of the show because it made sense to the books, especially for the second book, since a lot of the second book is analyzing like what being a hero is.
Yeah.
And like what that means and what sacrifices you have to make. And the hilarity of a lot of that book ends up being that like Penny shows back up and he's like kind of the hero Quentin always thought he would be, but it's Penny. Is hilarious. Wouldn't work quite as well in the show. So So what do we think about? What do we think about the Crown Quest of them having to answer 90s questions?
I thought that was great. So I love that scene because I think it cuts the heart of one of the things that both the book and show do pretty well, which is that in terms of this like revisionist fantasy kind of genre, there's this idea. It goes back to one of my favorite XKCD comics, which is the one with the ball pit. Where the guy has established a ball pit in his like living room, and somebody's like, "What the heck?" And he's like, "Well, you know, we're the adults now, and we get to decide what that means." And I think that fits very well here in that like they're in this fantasy world. There's all these traditions that they're having to kind of conform to or you know, fit into and satisfy, and yet they sort of get to decide. You know, what this means to them. What does it mean to be a king? What does it? You know, they sort of invent their own ceremony. that has a kind of a real personal nature to it, as they're all kind of apologizing and making vows to one another and everything. And so I felt like the 90s trivia was really part of that kind of signaling of like, this is a new way to sort of have this kind of fantasy element to it.
Yeah, and I also really enjoyed. I think the funniest part was, I mean, the wings thing was funny, but I really enjoyed that both Margot and Alice answered the Beach Boys question at the exact same time, and everyone just kind of looked at them and they're just like, "What?"
I mean, the highlight of that for me is Elliot, because Elliot chooses Patrick Swayze, who is obviously like a macho character, but also, you know, because he's, you know, sort of you could see Elliot having an attraction to him, and then the particular like lines that he chooses to recite are, you know, have a nobility to them, and an indication of like, you know, being standing up for what you believe in and standing up for others. And it felt like a very like funny yet very fitting thing for him to be drawn to, and also a great way for him to sort of start out his reign as king.
I lost it. That was so funny. That was hilarious, especially Alice's face, as like at first she has no idea what's going on, and then she's kind of into it. It's like all levels of amazing.
My only complaint is that I also wanted him to then have to dance in order to.
I was wondering about that. I was like, I don't think Alice can do that dance. I don't know. This could get weird. I also just enjoyed Penny sitting there the entire time being like, this is not my problem, but you guys are all crazy.
I love when Penny, like Quentin comes up with the wings answer, and Penny is like, of course you would know that. And I'm like, Penny, why are you only bullying Quentin? Everybody here just demonstrated pop culture knowledge, but you only pick on it when Quentin does it.
I mean, wait. The wings one's pretty funny, but I love the line where Quentin's like, "Wait, do I get to be king?" And then Elliot's like, "I mean, do you want me to give it to Penny?" And everyone, but it was more like he said that in a joking way. Like everyone agreed that's a terrible idea. No one's giving Penny the king.
Yeah, and Penny clearly does not want it.
Yeah, and Penny was also clear like, hell no. I'm already pissed off enough. I'm in this situation to begin with. Please do not make it worse. I beg you.
Sorry.
Were you saying something, or
I was jumping to something else.
Hold on. Are you jumping to something that's in Fillory still, or are you jumping to Julia?
I'm jumping in Fillory.
That's fine. Go ahead and jump.
Okay. Do you think it's weird that like, you know?
Hold on 1 second.
Okay.
In the future, you can just do that. Like, if you want to end something, go. Like, that's kind of what I was telling you. And like, you know, you're like, Matt transitions well. I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. Like, sometimes if you just end, it's fine. If we end things early, it ends early.
No, that's fine.
I really feel like it's in.
I just didn't want to. I regret interrupting you like mid joke as you were still riffing on that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Fair enough. But I was just reminding you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know.
Was the joke clean? Well, the joke would be clean on my end, so it's fine.
Sort of. You didn't finish it, but anyway, it'll be.
Well, I don't even know what I said now, so it's gone. The moment's gone.
It's fine. Do you think it felt kind of weird to you, like it did to me, that like, you know, Quentin is super into Fillory and he's really excited by the idea of being king, and then like at the end when they're like, oh, we have to go back to break bills, he's sort of like, okay, like there didn't really seem to be a moment of like wistfulness on his part of like leaving the fantasy realm that he's just found so recently.
I will say I would like the moment. I kind of understand why he felt this way, because he's not High King, and so he probably accepted it. I think it's a bit of continuity from the last season, in which he was like, he kind of came to this realization about him not being this hero and like all these things. And I think in the show's mind, they probably felt they didn't need to reemphasize that new realization. And they were like, of course, in his new state of mind, Quentin would be fine with leaving. I agree with you, though, that even though I understood, I think, why he didn't have it, I wish he'd even had a moment which, like, someone else is like, aren't you sad you had to leave? And he explains why he's not.
Yeah.
I do agree that was a missed moment, especially because they did some really nice character moments in general. One of my favorite moments of the episode was when they just randomly, well, not randomly, but when Alice does her just random thing about horses.
That was pretty hilarious. That was so out there. I was like, is she under a spell? Like, what is happening here?
But like when the horses go away and they're like, I can't believe this happened. She's like, I know, those horses were quite rude. and she looks all sad. And I mean, it wasn't completely out of nowhere, because wasn't her room like full of horses?
I don't know. Probably.
I think Harumi, like, I don't think that's completely as out of nowhere as you might think it is. I could have sworn they've made a point of showing, because in the books, this is a thing, certainly.
Look, I remember the books intimately. I have blocked most of that first season out of my memory.
But in the books, she likes horses as well.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think there's anything like this, but there's definitely some parts that they reference something about this.
I mean, all my favorite character moments in this were Elliot. Like, I love the moment when he sees his betrothed and is like, I think I like her, and then he's like, I hope I like her.
Well, yeah, it was like all those things that transition. I like how they set that up too. I also like how that probably established the fact that at very least they're establishing this Elliot is definitely bi.
Yes.
Which makes the point you were concerned about a little bit at points last year less problematic if the show is not trying to say he's gay but forced to marry this person.
Well, and the show, I also like that in his conversations with Quentin that they've like tacitly acknowledged that like yes they had sex, which is also good.
Yeah, I mean that helps too. I mean that part was running in the book though. The Elliot attraction to Quentin was an always thing that was there, even the entire time.
Yeah,
their entire friendship, they're like best friends, but I swear to God, half that friendship is based on hilarious sexual tension that was fulfilled once, but will never be fulfilled again.
Yeah, I'm just saying I'm glad the show isn't like trying to erase that.
Oh yeah, they or try to suggest that like somehow they didn't have sex,
right?
And it was just like Margot and them, because that was definitely also not true,
right?
So yeah, I thought they did some nice stuff there. I mean, yeah, Elliot's moments of talking about like being king, and as you said, him ending up sad was great. The great part where he like tells Quentin to hug him,
yeah,
and that was heartbreaking and like amazing. His speech to Alice was really good, of like apologizing to her about what happened.
I think this version of Elliot is one of the better parts of the show, and I'm really excited to see him transition as he did in the books into a good king and a better man.
Yeah, I mean, and this also like reinforced like one of our biggest complaints last season, which is that Elliot and Margot were never with the other characters, and it clearly showed that they're really helpful.
Yeah.
Being around them at all times, because A, it gives you more pairing options. B, they have great energy with everyone.
Yeah.
I enjoyed, they did the best they could to course correct the Margot and Quentin part of this, since they kind of changed a little bit. They didn't go as well as establishing, because part of obviously when they sleep together in the book is this idea that like at some level, like, well, Janet / Margot actually is sort of semi into Quentin, weirdly. It's like a weirder thing, and they had that one part where they're talking, and you get the sense they have a lot in common, and she enjoys talking to him, but they didn't really do enough of that to like do this. So like I thought they did the best they could of like course correcting like that relationship with her speech to him as well, since like there's only so much you could really do to salvage stuff they had skipped over so much of.
Well, I felt like even like in both the book and the show, that character's relationship with Quentin is sort of like, I think like her like for him as a person and her like inclination to have sex with him are sort of very divided. I don't feel like she wants to have sex with him because she likes him. I feel like she just like wants to have sex with him out of a desire to like fuck with him. No pun intended.
I think it was a weird though. Like I agree that was a part of it, but there's like a 20% to it that was also based on like.
Yeah, there was
always this undercurrent.
In the show, there was more tenderness to that moment on her part.
Her reaction to this, yes. But I mean, even her reaction to Quentin beforehand, like in the books, like there's enough there where you can tell that like it's not entirely outside the realm of her possibility to think she wanted to do it. But she's also like, well, in her mind, it was more like, oh, well, I'm totally attracted to Quentin. He's cool. Also, like, I'm going to screw everything up because fun. You're totally correct there. But I just meant like, what made that moment so interesting was that was a subtlety that they couldn't quite nail in the show because they didn't have time to nail their relationship properly, because the only scene they really have to even establish the kind of tenor of it is like the one scene that they're talking about, like the books.
Right.
And you find out that Margot is like a Fillory nerd, and a really important fact, because that means Margot can also answer Fillory questions when Quentin is not around.
Yeah, the one thing that actually does make me hopeful for this season is that like one of the things they had problems with last season was fleshing out the characters in a proper way. And like the longer a show goes on, the easier that gets because you have all that shared history that you can build off of.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Hold on one second.
Can I jump to Julia because I had a good transition for that.
I need to finish something, and you can.
Okay.
Sorry, can you repeat what the part you were saying right before I had to interrupt something? Because I had to text something. So.
What I was saying before.
What were we talking about specifically?
I was talking about. We talked about Margot. I was saying that the one thing that does make me hopeful for next season for this season is that one of the problems with the first season was their like character development, and that gets easier for shows as they go on because you have more of a shared history with the characters, and you can develop them deeper.
Yeah, I'll definitely agree that that's the number one reason I like this episode is they finally realized the one strength they kind of had last season was the minor character moments they would slowly build, and they're really starting to emphasize those more now, and caring less about plot per se and more about like actual like using those actors bouncing off each other and bouncing off each other to create like some really fun scenes together, like to form, or even just using the knowledge and have characters having interacted a lot, have those scenes. I think that's going to really help the show going forward.
Yeah.
Do you wish to go to Julia now?
Yeah. So you mentioned before, the show is taking a good step forward by, integrating Margot and Elliot better with the cast, which is why, it makes sense that, oh God, Julia's still separate, isn't she? She's off her own stupid plotline again.
I don't know. I'm torn with thinking about the Julia one. I think it's probably going to come down to how long she's separate.
Yeah.
If it's like the whole season, then yeah, it's me really annoying because then that just suggests to me that the show is like doesn't understand how to properly integrate her into the cast, and they don't want to do anything, and they're waiting. They're kind of waiting now. Admittedly, it will make some theoretical transition. There's some decisions they're clearly making that the character Julia is in the second book. She is not that character yet.
You mean at the end of the second book or during the second book?
During the second book, because
I mean that those plot moments have passed basically.
Well, I mean, sorry, hold on, I need to do this correctly. In the present of the second book.
Okay.
Since obviously the second book does a combination of both, but you also do get her story going forward of like you find out why, because in the book, obviously in the books we don't get her story in the first book, so the second book has to tell you how she gets to the point she is, and then we have her character when she is reattached to the plot line.
Yeah.
They have to do that differently here because let me redo that because I clipped like a motherfucker. They have to do that differently here because they, one, for television purposes, obviously had to put her second book storyline into the first season because she couldn't just disappear and then come back in the second season.
Right.
But the way they showed her, and they also did some stuff to fix some of her character stuff in a little bit. So the transition, but the character she is in the books is very different just in terms of like how she reacts to things, how she feels. A lot of it is based on the events that happened to her. I feel like I'm interested to see if they're going to fully commit to this, because that's why I think they're toying with this shade idea. Is I wonder if the show is trying to give themselves the option of this is how they can get Julia to where she was when she was with Quentin, since in the book she is very distant and emotionally like blunt.
It's weird because the show, like Julia, now after what happened to her at the end of last season, is making different choices, in that she has new goals. She's willing to, work with the Beast to try and get Reynard. But I don't feel like she's necessarily behaving all that differently. And I think that it's kind of weird for the show to make that choice not to have her character shift in reaction to these events, but possibly shift in reaction to this like bullshit magic spell involving the Shade, which is just like her soul. I don't know. It's very strange.
Well, I assume that they wanted to play around with the idea that like they wanted to see like her emotional response to what happened to her. Mm-hmm. And they're trying to use that to play and kind of maybe suggest this. And that's why they're keeping her separate too, because like, she wouldn't make the decision. I mean, you can make the argument that the real annoyance is that now it feels like the only justification of her being separated from them is that if she was with Quentin, like she would not choose potentially to lose the Shade because he would be there to like presumably help her get through things, as opposed to the Beast, who's clearly just going to be like, just give her to the emotions. It's fine. Just give it all up. And, so that's a little annoying. I mean, I like that at least I liked a couple of things they did show, though. I like the idea that she brings them and she makes them promise not to hurt them, which they don't know, but whatever. I also like the fact that they basically acknowledge that her deal with him was that, like, you will help me and then I will try to kill you.
Yeah, that was good. I think in terms of a character, like, I think this is kind of goes back to what we've been talking about in terms of like, Penny and everything, in that like, one of the things the books do so well is that they have characters leave the narrative and they return changed and they return very different in a way that is interesting and you want to dig into that. And when the show sticks with a character the whole way through, you have to be really good about showing how that change happens. And I don't know that they have that down necessarily, because I feel like there's a concern consciously or unconsciously that they cannot change this character too much because they still need to be somebody that we as the audience understand. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, also they changed Julia a little bit in general to make her what's the best way to say this? Since in the book, even Julia before the event is a lot less, let's just say, I don't really want to say nice, but I don't really have a better word. Empathetic, maybe that's the better word.
Yeah.
Empathetic than her book character is, who is like which I think is a lot of what part of the issues I always had with her character was I don't think they properly showed some transitions because of how they originally characterized her.
I'm sorry, in the show, I'm getting confused.
I'm sorry. In the books, my issue with Julie had always been that when they showed some of her like how she transitioned, they showed kind of who she was to begin with. There was always this issue of like, it kind of showed her to be a person that kind of seemed to not have as much empathy as you would think she would have. And like, it made her and Quentin's friendship never felt anything like worth saving based from her perspective, which is always weird, which is I like in the show. They made that a thing where both of them value it and it's clearly important. And I think it will help make the transition of if she slowly loses all this stuff and like what happens much more like sad or intriguing to watch. Whereas like in the books, like the ultimate state of Julia and Quentin's relationship, it's hard for me to really lament when things kind of go in opposite direction with them, when it never seemed like they were ever really good friends to begin with. Like, not really. That was like part of her storyline, quite frankly. And, I'm sure they wanted it back, but like on her end. So I think that's helped a little bit. But it also means that transitioning her for this point is weird because they're legitimately going to be losing something if they ever make a real change. And I do wonder if they're really hesitant to commit to that.
Yeah, I mean, and one thing that really troubled me one moment with her in this episode is when the Beast suggests to her that she can, that he can remove her shade and in exchange she'll get rid of emotions and have, more power over herself. There's like a hunger in her face as she considers that didn't feel like, I can erase the pain. It felt like the same old Julia, like, oh, this is another like, powerful man of authority who's offering me the magical power that I crave. So it really felt like a moment that was both true to her character, but not necessarily true to the change that I would hope she would experience in the aftermath of like where that path led her last season.
Yeah, which is why I'm hoping this is like a big like some big semi misdirect where like it will set things up. I mean, maybe what they do is ultimately set up where like she destroys her own shade at some point as like a decision she makes, but like it's independent of her. Because I will agree if it ends up being like she gets convinced by the beast to do something, and then once again lets like a male in her life kind of like make her decisions for her, that will be very frustrating.
Yeah.
Because that, I will admit, the book only has happened once, and or I guess maybe twice if you want to count whatever you want to count with her relationship with Quentin.
Mm-hmm.
And that not really there, but if we just kind of want to count that, after that it's really only like, you know, kind of whatever, however much you want to combine her entire experience being a part of that, you know, witch collective, ends up being this combination of a, ultimately, you know, a like seemingly good male figure offers up, and ultimately obviously a really horrendous male figure taking things away from her. And then
Right.
You know, her character from that point on is definitely someone very different who does stuff and doesn't take shit from things and like doesn't allow others to kind of dictate her life to her.
Yeah.
And that Julia is great. And
that's definitely a Julia that I'm hoping we'll get to see.
That Julia is great. And I just like the fact, you know, I'm hoping that it's just a bumpier ride, because at least it looks like now they're trying to at least make it look like the Julia. I assume part of this is it will help establish more that when she makes that change, you'll understand though what she had to lose to get to this point a little bit better.
Mm-hmm.
And it will help from a character perspective, because obviously some of the horrendous events like are self-explanatory.
Yeah.
But just from like certain character shading, it's a much more interesting from a television perspective where you have to show things more than suggest it. Like really showing like, well, Julie went from being this kind of person to like this kind of person will make a lot more sense than if they try to do something, you know. So I'm hoping this is like her seeing her own weaknesses. I mean, ultimately will just depend on though is how long she is separated from the rest of the group.
Yeah.
I agree if she is stuck again in her own storyline for way too long. I mean, it sounds like they at least are going to bring back most of the other sides of her storyline. You know, I don't know I can't remember what her name is in this show, but Abigail from Hannibal will still be back. And then Katie will be back, and she's actually a series regular this year. So it's nice that she's actually going to get to be around more, especially because she has a really good, since she can kind of interact with all the groups. And she's also got I like her interactions with both Julia, with Penny, and even this kind of stuff she did with Quentin. They're all like really interesting. So seeing kind of how they plan to use her, especially because she's also going to be interesting because the character she's based off of is so like non-existent really in the books after a certain point. You know, like that character is basically like she's kind of around for Julia, and then she shows up for a brief little thing in book 3, and then she's gone. And so seeing how they're going to morph that character is going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, clearly we're seeing like the story we didn't see that led up to that moment. So that's an exciting direction for the show to go in.
Yeah, I mean, so I'll be interested to see also, if that will be the big change too, since obviously how they do the Renard thing is going to be interesting because, you know, it looks like they're going to try to resolve that separately than like the way the book kind of just never really goes back to it again. Other than like a passing thing, they're going to make it a more permanent thing. And that's also part of obviously like the transition they have to do, where if they're going to make the decision where Julia is going to be kind of how she is now, they can't really skip over it in the way the book does.
Which goes back to like one of the laments about adapting these books, and that like the show is just in this mode of like monster hunting, which is something I keep going back to because critics are comparing this to Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which has some merit as a comparison, but it also bothers me in terms of the books are like resolutely not that thing. Like, so the show is like, oh, it's a villain and he hurt one of our main characters, and there's this hinted at revenge story, and obviously we need to show every step of that. And it's like, well, that might work for your show, but there was something great to be said about the way the book was like, no, sometimes bad shit happens to you, and you don't necessarily get even with that. You don't necessarily get over it. It just changes you, and you have to try and live your life.
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of what that's definitely the point of where I'm just like, yeah, if someone had just made this show and it'd go, I mean, we've made Buffy the Vampire Slayer, but with wizards, let's just say.
Yeah.
And that's all they told you. I'd be like, oh, that's awesome. Let's say this was literally that show. And then that means you also get to remove some of the stuff that happens that makes no sense because they were in the books. I would love that show. Absolutely love it. It'd be great. Just because every Buffy clone now benefits from seeing the mistakes Buffy made in pacing at the first seasons. So they don't make those mistakes generally. Doesn't mean they're ultimately a good show, but it means that they always are entertaining. But you're right. Like, the problem, of course, though, is this is in fact not based on something. It's just, wizard Buffy the Vampire Slayer. It's supposed to be based on books that did a lot of different stuff. And, one could argue, well, it's on sci-fi. And my response would be, well, The Expanse is on sci-fi. So they could have tried to do, more with it, sure. And I will always semi-lament that.
Yeah, there's something deeply sad to me about taking a series that is really about, like, what if we had a genre story that we told in a literary, emotional fashion that didn't care about the trappings so much, and then taking that and going, these trappings are awesome.
I mean, they are awesome.
They are from time to time awesome, but it's still a lesser thing.
Yeah, but we should get this out of our system now because I really don't want to spin. We're going to really try not to spin all of these just complaining about how these aren't the books, because I don't think that's really helpful, because we're kind of past that point.
If even one person hears my repetitive rants and goes out and read the books, it will have been worth it.
Well, I mean, yes, you should read the books because they're well worth it and very enjoyable and they're very different. But and I think here's the thing though. I think this is the kind of series that would get people more likely to read the books than an actual version of this book, because I think this is going to appeal to more mass audiences, and I think a lot of them will then go and read the books. Whereas the version is when it's questionable. Like, I love The Magicians, but if you do a full adaptation of this, there's some weird things that happen to The Magicians that I'm not even entirely sure the best version of the show actually work on TV.
Let me in the interest of talking about the show then instead of the books. One of the things that bothered me about the show last season was there was a thematic inconsistency in terms of what is magic supposed to be in this story. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it was drugs, sometimes it was sex, sometimes it was kind of a coming of age thing. I feel like this episode had a really good version of that metaphor, where magic was really about sort of entrenched power. And you saw that come through in Julia's storyline in terms of the gender issues that she's dealing with, and the way the Beast really represents a lot of the idea that out of the tragedy that they've experienced, if they just shut off their emotions, they can have power over themselves and power over others. And Martin Chatwin is in some ways a symbol of that patriarchy. And then you can also see it in Fillory and how all the magical parts of Fillory are tied into these often equally patriarchal and absurd traditions that themselves have power. So I felt like that was a really good use of that. And so that's one of the things where I'm I hope that this season doesn't jump around. I hope it sticks it with this and digs into it and digs into what it means, because I think it really applies to kind of everything the show should be talking about.
Yeah, I mean, the episodes seem to be pretty thematically focused. And so hopefully that will continue, because the thematics, they set up I don't know, 3 or so thematic lines they set up feel like things that you could do an entire season with. You don't really need anything else.
Yeah.
There are some there's a lot of levels. There's stuff with Julia, there's the Fillory stuff, and then there's just the stuff with them. And I think you can kind of literally carry all of those through. And then if you want to half count whatever you do with Penny, fine. If you want to make a different thematic thread specifically with Penny, because he's clearly going to have some sort of separate storyline, I'm okay with that.
What do you think, judging from just for this, what do you think that storyline is going to be? Is this going to be the season of how Penny is a dick and that causes problems for him?
I don't know, because I'm interested when they had that statement where they're what you're about to become. They make a statement alluding to his future. Mm-hmm. and I can't tell if that's, I mean, mini spoiler alert, like librarian based stuff.
Yeah,
Since
is
like
he still? I don't remember enough about this in the first season. Is he still like a secret, like destined, like world hopping Jedi?
he is like the most powerful world hopper like ever lived. It seems
Mhm.
like, or at least who's been alive in a while. And he went until, and like, you know, in the books, that the library subplot they introduce is a much more important part of his character. I'll be interested to see if they mean that, they mean something else. If they do even more with his like world hopping, create some other specific thing. Or if like his, you know, if it's, you know, if his destiny more intertwined with like the interlands
Mhm.
than, you know, Fillory, or are they going to invent something for him in Fillory? I mean, yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I could see some of that. You know, if they were going to do that, that's how I would probably do his hands. Is like his hands. If he's going to continue to act like a dick for no reason, his hands are going to act like a dick back to him.
Mhm.
That could be that's an interesting storyline thematically that could make up for the fact that he got his hands back so easily. And like, because then some character change would have to go with it, and there be all this stuff, and you don't have to like, you know, the show doesn't need to like dull Penny completely. He's a very important purpose. I think his antagonism towards Quentin actually is somewhat constructive at times in this show, because like, you know, a lot of some of his antagonism is ridiculous, just like nerd, and that stuff's stupid. But like, some of it is legitimate, like Quentin, you fucking suck, and he's the one person who will call Quentin out on it all the time.
I mean, to me, like I don't know where they're going with Penny because I'm not necessarily sure. I'm not necessarily sure that they like have a firm grasp on like Penny's character as opposed to just his personality.
Well, yeah, that's why I'm saying I'm hoping that that will help too, by like being forced to soften him a little bit. They're going to have to actually develop other parts of his character.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what I'm hoping, because yes, they fall on the crutch too much of, well, Penny would say this now. It's like, well, why? Well, you know, Penny's being a dick. It's like, but why?
Right.
You know, that's what I think his analysis stuff was really good for that reason last season. Like, a lot of their discussions and stuff were actually interesting and based off of like him not just being a dick for the hell of it. Katie and him kind of that at the beginning. I think Margot and him be really good too, because Margot will actually is the one person who could actually like keep up with him if he's being like, if he's doing that, and she could just respond right back to it.
Yeah.
Elliot probably can too, but it's a little different energy. Like Margot's energy of the way she like insults people is very similar to Penny's. So it will create a very interesting dynamic. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to say. Penny, I'm have to do a lot of wait and see with. He had some funny moments, but like, yeah, I feel like I need to see definitely more before I can really get a sense of what Penny's do. I mean, I'll say this, like, if they can do more humor, like we said earlier, of like the delivery of when he talks about not having hands is just like amazing. And
I like that. I also really liked. I was just thinking about the moment when he like gets out of the water and he's yelling at the guy who wants to be paid for helping him, uh, and and I was like, was this moment just like reflexive dickishness that's dumb because everybody knows in a fairy tale like you be nice to people and like fulfill your obligations. But then I remember like the way he put it. He had like an internet philosophical argument about like this is this is like an economic problem that you've taken this is public land and it doesn't actually belong to you and like and I was like, no, that kind of is Penny's role here as like the guy who is sort of down on fantasy and popular culture and that kind of dreamy thing that Quentin stands for.
That's why I said like you can't, softening him is different than taking it away completely. I think he serves a very key purpose in like bringing people down. He's like the farthest in, obviously, how he interacts.
What they need to do actually, I think, is figure out what he wants, because he's in so opposition to not just Quentin but like the soul of the show, that if you're not going to make him an antagonist, you have to come up with a way for him to have a goal that is that fits his sort of negative nature without just being totally at cross purposes with people.
Yeah, especially because they don't want to commit to him being in his own separate storyline like Julia is.
Yeah.
And for her to be in her own separate storyline, they basically have to literally make like two opposing goals, where it's like her goal is to use the beast to kill Renard, and she needs to keep them alive as long apart, and their job, and then Quentin and the group's job is like, we're going to kill the beast no matter what.
Right.
I did also really enjoy. I guess this kind of go back, but the like everyone's like, but Julia stole it, and Quentin trying to explain, like, but like, like him trying to explain why like he can't be angry with her about this.
Right.
And
He's trying to be like, look, she was, she's like traumatized. She's basically like, having PTSD. She's
I
not
think,
responsible for her actions, and everyone else was like, fuck her.
well, I think though they made a mistake of for Quentin. I think Quentin's character, Quentin would have also said, honestly, it was my fault for putting her in, not like all the other stuff. I mean, like putting her in a position to have to make the decision she had to make at the end, like
Yeah.
knowing what he knows. Like I should have probably figured a way for her not, or at least him like grappling with that idea of like, I don't know if I made the right decision even bringing her along, or like,
Yeah.
once I learned, I maybe should have. Him being like, maybe I should have stopped her or tried to stop her. And then even if that led to an argument, him going, well, but the problem is half my problems with Julie have been me trying to tell her she can't do something. And so, like, I think there could have been a really interesting discussion he could have had there about, like, I think that's part of the guilt, and part of why he doesn't want to do it too is I'm sure he also in his mind is like, she's not sane. She couldn't do this. And, it felt like the next part of the line is maybe I shouldn't have put her in a position with a crazy person who could possibly help her kill the dude she killed, because she's in a place where she'll do that.
I definitely, after the end, like after where his character got to the end of last season, I do not want to see him go back to not taking responsibility for things.
Right. But I meant, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, I think there'd been an interesting thing. That would have been an interesting discussion point, though, of like, how much responsibility was it? Because there's like a line, like, you don't want, obviously if you try to be like, it was all my fault, all this ever happened to her. Well, okay, that's pushing it. If he wants to analyze whether or not this decision was partially his fault, that's fair to talk about, because you can have an interesting discussion about like her autonomy, like, him like, putting a loaded gun into a person's, like, things like that.
Yeah.
There could be an interesting discussion that they could have had without it becoming like the horrible patronizing version that it becomes in a lot of shows, where, a character's like, it's all my fault because I made decisions that clearly affected her entire life, and then she made decisions and they were all because of me. She has no autonomy. Like, I don't want that discussion.
Clearly what we need from this season are a lot of long conversations that are meta-examining, like, which characters have agency and which don't.
Oh, considering that's half of the magicians, yes. I need more conversations that are also like Quentin's dream, where Alice screams at him for like making it not pass the Bechdel test. Like, yes, to me, that is exactly the kind of things they should be having. This is the show. Even this version of the show, that's the Buffy the Vampire Slayer, can have that discussion.
Basically, magicians need to get woke.
Well, I mean, like, that's the kind of thing this show can still have, no matter what version it is. Like, that's how you can differentiate. That's how you can take the spirit. Like, my hope right now is they've basically figured out the spirit of the book they want. And there's a part of the spirit of the book they have taken. Not the monster of the week part, but just like the way their characters work.
Yeah.
And the way the characters approach magic and what magic means in some levels. And Fillory, for the most part, I'm going to be honest, their Fillory stuff has actually fit pretty well with a lot of how screwed up Fillory was in the books.
Yeah.
So, like, if they're now going to take those bare bones things and just apply their own stuff to it, but like how you make it clear that, like, how you make a difference of like why, how you basically make it where like, this is why I wanted the magician's version of this instead of just the like generic version of this, is because magicians does this. So we're going to do like analyze this too. And it's the type of stuff I think these writers could do. Whether or not they will do, I don't know, but it's the type of things that doesn't require a level of different type of writing than what it seems like they're capable of. It's just, they're going to have to do it more. I don't know if they're going to choose to do it or not, but I think they can.
Yeah.
And if they do, I think that will further help the second season kind of like shine. Because as of now, like, if nothing else, look, both of us begrudgingly, you more begrudgingly than me, admitted that last season was at least entertaining at times, even if it was infuriating as hell. So hopefully this season can just be entertaining and not just like infuriating at the same time. And if that's the case, then I think this season will be a very successful season of television, and I will continue to be glad the show exists, at least, even if it's not the show I ultimately wanted to begin with.
Yeah.
So is there any final thoughts, I guess before we'll just go on, either of like final thought for this episode or just a final thought about like what you above all hope to see in this season?
I mean, I always just like, regardless of whether it meets the books or not, I've always just wanted the show to be good. And a lot of my anger at the show last season was about how it just seemed like they were failing at some basic writing stuff in terms of characterization and plotting and stuff. My main hope is that since they're constructing this part of the story basically entirely on their own, that they're able to structure it a lot better than last season.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest hope for the season going forward is that the pacing and structural stuff they seem to have a better handle on the first episode is not a fluke. It is a ongoing thing that they're now they know what they're doing. That's going to go on. If that's happened, I think the show could be really successful this season. And this will, in fact, not just be us bitching about things all the time. We could actually enjoy ourselves. Yeah. And, only be infuriated when inevitably they probably think they have to include something from the book. So it just is for reasons.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good first episode of the Fillory edition of our podcast. As always, you can find our other thoughts on pop cultures on our blog, www.insidethekraken.com. And we'll be back, hopefully, week to week with this, as I said. I'm not going to entirely guarantee that, but that is the plan.
Yes.
And, we found ourselves able to do that with Game of Thrones. We didn't think we'd be able to. So I think we'll be able to do it. But, I just feel like we should put that out there, that it's not entirely guaranteed. But hopefully we'll be back next week. Until then, we have to go because the Kraken has also learned the power of swallowing, and it's caused some problems.
You really... You're like missing the punchline to that joke. That was such a good setup for like something really funny, and then you're just like, and bad things.
I don't know if there's anything. I don't know. I felt it didn't need to go any further than that. I mean, look, if you cover the punchline right now, I'll just redo it.
And he's all choked up.
That's terrible. That is literally you going, you said something, and then you gave the most generic something you possibly could give, which is worse than me just saying bad things. And you know that from when you said it, you were like, yeah.
And now we have to embark on a quest to find him some mouthwash. I don't know.
And now we have to embark on a quest to purify the room.
To purify the room?
Because he's swallowing swallowing. Swallowing is inherently an unclean action.
Right, but what room is this? I guess the room inside the Kraken?
I need some sort of purify something. I just said room. Do we have a inside of things that makes sense more?
The intake chamber?
I guess. Is that too much?
Nothing's too much.
No, I meant like technical, not like. Like, does that take that to where we've now gone too in deep in this? It's not funny anymore. So it's like very.
I don't know. Say it.
Okay. We have to go now. The Kraken has learned. Sorry. We have to go now. The Kraken has also learned the power of swallowing, and now we have to purify the intake chamber.
Yeah, that's too clinical.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
You need something like we have to like mop the foyer.
Mop the foyer?
Yeah.
You want to go to that version of it? I kind of feel like I should be like, it's too bad there's no way I could be like, now we have to purify the foyer, which really just means we have to mop a lot of stuff up. That feels like that's too much, but I kind of feel
just mop the foyer. Just yeah.
Okay, fine. What was the exact line of the episode? She was like,
I think she was like power of swallowing or something like that.
Right? Because it was like the power. It was like a sarcastic, like the power of swallowing comment.
Yeah.
Here, hold on. Let me see.
Do you want to go look it up?
Well, I think the AV Club That was definitely one of the lines I mentioned because that line is amazing.
Okay.
Because Margot says it, it's great, and oh, that's right. I can watch you, Man Seeking Woman. A show in which I like the direction they decided to go with in the third season, and I'm just like, I don't know if I'm going to bother watching the first 2 seasons.
What's new in the third season?
He has a girlfriend.
So
like
he's no longer seeking women.
Yes, they literally just eliminated that part, and it's like a long-term relation. And I think that's really interesting.
Yeah. No, that is.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Are you even officially affiliated with the torrent? That's pretty funny. They just said, all she said was, while the swallowing joke made me laugh. That's all he said. And then it went to the more like, it went to the part where it says, Alice, like, you've got to be kidding me. I know those horses were so rude.
All right, hold on.
It is true. I do hope they made a point of they hope Alice has more oblivious humor, and I have to agree. She definitely has been too like.
She says swallowing has its privileges.
Okay. We have to go now. The Kraken has learned the power of swallowing, and now we need to revoke his privileges.
No, I think it needs to be like we have to go now. The Kraken has learned that swallowing comes with its privileges, but for us it means we have to mop the foyer. Yeah.
Okay, I'll try that.
Okay.
We have to go now, for the Kraken too has learned that swallowing has its privileges. Unfortunately for us, that just means we have to mop up the foyer.
That was good.
Okay. Okay. I need to see the line. They've had the thing now where it shows like the parts for the season of like it has like a thing where it's like Alice the Wise. I'm stopping. It has like Alice the Wise, and then it's like, and I really want to see the one that's like Quentin, then it's like the really long.
It's Quentin the mildly socially maladjusted, I think.
Yeah.
Which is great.
Magicians, Juan, David.
Okay.
Or Magicians. Export.
New folder. Fillory. New folder. Episode 1.
Let's see. Is this in here? Yay! I can watch the last. Ooh, it's in 720. Ooh. Can watch me some more Sweet Vicious.
But before you do that, do you have a little bit of time to record the plugs?
No.
God damn it.
We will do those.
I hate you so much.
We'll do them next week.
Okay.
We will do them by the end of next week. So if I fucking stall this, then that means if I just have to lose the ability to do something that does not involve other people, then I will lose it.
Okay.
I will not, in fact, cancel plans for this, but
okay.
But I will, in fact. But yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Let's see here. All right. Now let me just get that in the folder. Podcast raw.
Sweet.
Or, sorry. I mean music.
While I have you, do you want to divide up these movies?
Let's, because I'm not going to watch them tomorrow. We can do that tomorrow.
Are we doing something tomorrow or no?
No, but that's my point.
Okay.
I can take the 20 minutes it needs for us to divide these movies up and put my new list in.
All right. Just give me a call at some point tomorrow. I'll be
It just kind of comes down to if I sleep. I mean, it kind of comes down to a couple of things. Like I work again from 4 to 8 this time,
okay.
So it's roughly the same, but 30 minutes longer.
Okay.
And then we'll work from there.
Yeah. I'm like I have the meeting for the politics thing at like noon, and then for a couple hours, and I'm gonna probably work.
It probably won't happen before. If I had to guess, if I wake up tomorrow, I'm gonna like dick around before
Okay.
because things have been all fucked up and stuff. Well, it just depends. Like last night I thought I was gonna